Really, what's Tiani? Do y'all know what ancient Aztec or Nahuatl music sounded like? You might have heard some songs on YouTube, like some dedicated to Tezcatlipoca or a prayer to Tonantzin. You might hear some Nahuatl songs played with a drum. And these songs, while they're really good, they are technically, their origin is based off of Plains native musical styles, not ancient Aztec styles. So these are songs that are used more like in a sweat lodge ceremony type of setting. So you won't find any Nahuatl speaking community singing in this kind of musical style with drums. Now, certainly, there's Nahuatl music that exists today, but the European influence is pretty obvious. So violins now play the role of the flute, and guitars now play the role of the ancient drums. In fact, the verb tlatzotzona today means to play a guitar, but it can also refer to playing a drum, that kind of strumming or beat kind of style. So Nahuatl music has evolved over 500 years of European influence. So let's trace back to ancient Nahuatl music, and we still have a lot of work to do in that area. Obviously, a lot of ancient music from the Aztecs was banned, especially if it was religious music, but the music itself wasn't banned. But with the arrival of European instruments, most native communities immediately, really quickly started to play the new instruments and European music. One Spanish author, Antonio de Ciudad Real, he was traveling in the 1580s across Mesoamerica, and he took a lot of notes of what he saw, and he noted that European music was quickly taking over in pretty much all native communities in central Mexico. Even in small villages where you'd expect where they had some self-rule, an indigenous ruler, and less influence from the Europeans, but even still, European music was quickly taking over even in that setting. In Tlaxcala, he noted that he only heard European music played on the streets. So how do we reconstruct ancient music? We have two major historical documents. One are the Cantares Mexicanos. They were recently rediscovered, but they were written quickly, like after the conquest. And we have another document called Los Romances de los Señores de Nueva España, and that's also from the 1500s. They collect over 90 songs written in Nahuatl, with no Spanish translation given. And so, because they're songs and it's recording music as it was heard, it can be kind of tricky to translate it accurately. It's not the same as other Nahuatl you've seen. So these documents give us the lyrics to each song, but then how do we reconstruct it? The documents give us a few cues. First of all, they state that two major instruments accompany the music. One is the two-tone drum, called the teponaztle, and it's called so because it's a wooden log drum that has two tones. So this is a two-tone drum. It's got two tones, a high tone and a low tone. And several of these survive from ancient times too. The second instrument that we have is the huehuetl, or the tall drum. You might see Aztec dancers play this one. But in ancient times, the huehuetl was played just with the hands. Whereas in Aztec dancing today, it's to be louder, it's played with sticks. But in ancient times, only the teponazli was played with the sticks. With the huehuetl, you can strike the drum on the rim though, so you can accommodate the pitch. So huehuetl players had a way to retune their drum according to every song. Flutes were probably used as well in the cantares, but there's no melody recorded for these songs, and no one recorded anything about that. So for that, one would have to copy maybe surviving melodies recorded from native groups. Some of our oldest recordings for people like the Kora or the Wirarica music. there's 500 years of difference there, and it's a different culture technically, even though they're related. So there's no guarantee that these are the same, that they'll use the same melodies. Another note about flutes is that the surviving flutes from Mexico, from ancient Mexico, typically have about 4 or 5 notes, unlike the typical 12-note scale that you'll see like in modern instruments. So the percussion seems to be a major component to these songs, and the documents do give a description or some clues about how we're supposed to play those. The documents tell us that each song is labeled with a combination of the notes ti, to, ki, and ko. So those are the 4 notes for the drumming patterns. That's all the clues, though. The rest is kind of up to us to piece together. With ti, to, ki, ko, you can notice 2 vowels, the I and the O, and 2 consonants, the T and the K sound. So this represents what the drumming sounded like to the ancient transcribers of this music. So we can do acoustic analysis that tells that I is a high-pitched sound and O is lower-pitched sound. That's generally how it sounds like across any language. We can assume then that ti and ki are going to represent a high note on the teponaztli, and to and ko are going to represent the low notes. Keep in mind though, not every researcher agrees with this. There's many researchers who have different attempts of reconstructing this. I'll share a link for a good article that goes over the major differences and different opinions of different researchers trying to do the same thing. The next mystery is the difference between the T sound and the K sound. There's 2 major opinions here. One is that T and K are still representing 2 more pitches, meaning that there's a total of 4 different notes, that ti, to, ki, ko are 4 different notes going from low to high. A second opinion is that the T's represent a downbeat and the K's represent an upbeat. Downbeat means it's starting a sequence of 2 drums hitting together. So that gives us several possibilities for the reconstruction of at least the rhythm. We can hear some examples created by Phil Tulga.
T toko T toko T toko T 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 T toko T toko T toko T
So this gives us several possibilities for reconstruction of the rhythm at least. So we can hear some examples created by Phil Tulga on his website. Once we have the rhythm, we need to fit the lyrics with the beat, and this can be tricky as well. Does each syllable go with one note? One clue comes from Spanish chronicler Andrés Pérez de Rivas. He was a Jesuit working in Mexico City in the early 17th century. He wrote, "What is sung always corresponds with what the teponaztli plays." And that implies that yes, each syllable or word goes with a note from the teponaztli. But we still don't know all the specific rules once you actually try to piece it together. Can you squeeze two syllables into one note? Do we make the grammar fit the music, or do we make the music fit the grammar? When we make an attempt to match the lyrics to the drumming, we find strange words that don't mean anything. In the lyrics, we see words repeated over and over like owaya, owaya. According to the researcher Bierhorst, these represent war cries or maybe anguish. And so they do seem on the surface similar, at least, to a lot of Native American musical chants that rely on ya and wa and aya and oya, those type of syllable sounds that you hear in music, where oftentimes they represent more emotion than actual words. But we find another more puzzling word in the cantares, which is ya. And the strange thing about this one is that it can be put into the middle of a word, so it'll kind of break a word into two pieces, and that kind of breaks typical grammatical rules. So songs can do this, and even songs in English sometimes don't make grammatical sense, so that they do make sense, so that they fit the music. So that's a possibility that you're supposed to read it normally. But so how do we account for these semi words? Do they need to be shouted? Do they just get casually inserted? Are they said in the background by background singers? Do they count as one of the syllables? Do we count that? So since these ya actually affect the pronunciation of the word, I would guess that they're actually really meant to be sung. Look at this verse down below. Shiu tlamatelolla. The word here is actually shiu tlamatelolli, and they inserted the ya, which influences the ya to become a la, to assimilate to the L before it. The next sentence does the same thing. Quetzalchalchihuitl or Quetzalchalchiutli becomes Quetzalchalchiutla, where they're inserting that ya again at the end. Ipanye nikmati, ya. Nokwik a ya. Mayektla xochitl I. So this one, here it's in the middle of the sentence. Possibly, maybe I split this wrong. Perhaps the yektla was supposed to be the ending. Otherwise, why is a ya in the middle? But if I'm making it fit the syllables, this is how I would probably split it up. Sanomak on mani ya. So here we have that ya again. So another way to split up these verses would look like this below, where I force it to end on the ya in ipan yenikmati ya. No quick aya mayektla, so I'm ending it on the ya, so that I'm forcing the ya to be at the end of each stanza here. So let's take this song, Song 22, page 28R from the Cantares Mexicanos. The song says that it should be played as such. Tico, 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 ti. Tico, 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 ti. But when the song ends, it sounds like to, toco, toco, to. To, toco, toco, to. To, toco, toco, to. So it could sound like this. Tico, 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 ti. Tico, 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 ti. And the song would end with to, toco, toco, to. Now we need to make the lyrics match the beat, which is where the real work is. Each syllable goes with either each quarter beat or with each literal beat. Tico, 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 ti has 7 syllables, so I'll try to match the beat with each sentence. We can use repeating phrases as a clue as to where one sentence begins and one ends. For example, we can see the phrase Ipanye nikmatilla, that's repeated over and over again. So that tells us perhaps this is one whole unit. That's one whole sentence there. And note that this phrase has 7 syllables in it. If it doesn't, we may have to drag out a syllable or squeeze 2 syllables into one space to make the music fit. So one possible way that this song would be reconstructed would be Xiutlamatelola, Quetzalchalchihuitla, Ipanyenikmatia, Nocuicaya, Mayectlaxochitli, Sanomac on Mania. So that's just one example of how this song could be played, possibly. But like what mentioned, there's different styles, there's different variations, there's different interpretations about how the song could be played. But I'll link the resources I have down below, and maybe one of you all will help crack the code of how these songs sounded like. Let's Pascamate.